Yes, so where are we, likewise, up back there? Yep.
He would probably be immortal if he had all this quality to be consistent in the creativity of the whole universe and to maintain it on the long term. He would probably be immortal.
Yeah, I didn't get that.
Immortal. He'd probably be immortal.
Oh, yes, okay. So in terms of the fact, he has to exist longer than the universe, because if he creates that and particularly maintains it, it has to exist longer than that. So obviously that's a long time.
But that doesn't prove immortality, it proves maybe a very, very, very long life.
It does. Much longer than much longer than I've existed. So yeah, in terms of, we know that we're not sure at this stage. We haven't discussed a very primary quality that God must have, and that is of inbuilt infinite. Everything is infinite. There has to be everything associated with God, and this is something that I learned when I was in my spirit life, actually, more than on earth, is infinite in its nature. So infinite love, infinite intelligence, infinite power, infinite wisdom. It all had the quality of being unlimited in every possible way. And that's something, as you connect to God, God can tell you these things, of course. And so you'll find the more of a connection you have with God, the more strongly you will feel these things. That God is infinite, an infinite being. Now, our finite mind, given our limited intellect, finds the whole concept of infinity almost impossible to grasp. And so that's an interesting thing in itself. But the more you become connected to God, the more you accept it. That there is this infinite nature of God that pervades everything God does. Yeah.
I would just say about creation, if you create something that works and it's good and it's beautiful and you get this lovely feeling.
Yeah.
This is what I believe.
You keep wanting to go back to feelings all the time, though.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about feelings.
This is what creates a love.
Well, that's right, but I'm talking about love as a feeling, I know, but I'm saying, I'm looking at this intellectually and going, I'm not feeling something here yet. Because if you think about, like, for me in the first century when I was looking at the existence of God, I didn't feel God right from the beginning. It wasn't like that for me at all. I had to come to terms with, I thought about these matters. And then I thought, well, if this is true, the fastest way for me to find out whether God exists is just ask Him.
That's what you said,
Yeah. And when I did ask, as I was clear enough, when I did ask, I got a response. And it's like, God exists. So I didn't have to go through all the other things. But the average person on earth has been taught not to ask. And in fact, if you look at the education system nowadays, it's very much governed towards not contemplating there's a God at all, not even asking the question. Presenting God as a theory rather than a fact, and not even presenting God as a fact or a theory. They're not even presenting God at all as an idea or concept at all now. So it took me like quite a few years in the first century to become very firm in my feelings, to actually get to the point to ask God and had any trust that God would answer. It took some time, but...
How old?
I was about four years of age when I started to sort of feel God, but I didn't know what I was feeling. And so it was only when I was in my teenage years that I asked and got responses. And then I knew for certain. Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah, it's difficult.
yeah, if we right across the edge there, thanks.
How did you know that it was God that answered?
Good question. It's something I had to resolve. Yeah, because of course, if God exists and God is a being that I can't see, then it would also suggest, potentially, that there's other beings I can't see, and how do I know it's not them? So that was a good thing I had to resolve, actually. It took me nearly 4 years to resolve that in the first century, to trust that actually, no, this being was far beyond the intelligence or the love of any other being that because I started realising from a young age in the first century that I could talk to other unseen beings. And so I knew there was a whole collection of unseen beings that I could speak to. And also myself and my cousin, John the Baptist, he could talk to spirits all the time as well. So whenever we got together, every time my family went to Jerusalem, we got together and me and him were like, who can we talk to now? You know what I mean? And so we'd be talking to spirits all the time and working out who this was and who that was. And there were people who would come along and claim they are who they say they are, but we'd ask them a few questions and eventually work out they were lying to us, and eventually we could be sensitive to the fact that people lied, and how could we feel that people were lying versus when they were telling the truth. And it took ages to sort out those kind of things. So that's what happened all the way through my teenage years. So right up until I was 19, from the time I was 12, that's what I was doing. Looking at all these unseen people that I could speak to, but I didn't know who was God, who was a person, how nice they were, how bad they were. Because sometimes we talk to some really evil people as well, and it was eventually we had to work out how to determine the difference. Yeah, it's a valid statement though, isn't it? If there's people you can't see, then how do you know they're claiming to be God and they're not God?
But what was the thing that made you sure you were talking to God then?
Eventually what happens is the quality of the infinite nature of God you start to get to the stage of feeling it. In other words, that it's way beyond any limitation. And once you start realising that, you realise the major difference between communicating with any human, whether they are in spirit or on earth, and God, is that God is way more, infinitely more powerful, infinitely more loving, infinitely more intelligent. And whenever I talk to a human, whether they were in spirit or on earth, there was always deep limitations in their abilities to understand, knowledge, love, wisdom, power. There were all these limitations all the time. And so after a while it becomes very clear to you who's got limitations and who hasn't. Yeah.
There's nothing like it.
Yeah. So it's very important actually to put in this list the quality of infinity, because actually that's eventually how you determine the difference.
Thank you.
Okay. If we go right up the back.
Yes, Edward. Was God always an all-knowing being, or is he still an evolving being, or was it?
That's a very good question. I think, as far as I'm aware at this stage, he's always been all-knowing. But, and I don't understand how that can be the case. But every question I ask God, because remember, once you have a relationship with God, you can ask God these questions.
Yeah.
So every question I ask God about, how did you always know? I always get back a response, he always knew, but I don't understand anything else from the answer. How did he always know? I don't know. I'm going to have to improve in my development to understand that, I think. What I've learned in my own progress is that I had to receive more of that love from God, God's love, in order to understand even God to a small extent. I just had anything I didn't understand, if I asked for more love, eventually I got to the stage of understanding. But I had to be really honest with myself, because even in the first century I had to be honest with myself and go, well, there's a whole heap of things here I do not know about God, and all I've got to do is be really, really open about coming to understand them. And to use the intellect the intelligence God gave me, as well as the emotional intelligence God gave me, to determine the facts of the matter. Yeah. But it's a good question. Yeah. Next to it.
How do we know it's only one?
That's also a good question. Because I've never been able to connect to a number 2. Ever. I've tried.
So we intellectually do not know for sure.
Well, intellectually I didn't know, but I'm pretty certain now that there is no 2 gods. There's only one. But when I say pretty certain, I'm absolutely certain. But I had to ask the question. I had to ask the question. If there's a second God out there, I'd like to talk to you too. And if there's a third God out there, I'd like, and here I'm talking about God as a being that has all of these qualities. If there's a second one, why wouldn't you want to know? Or a third one, or a fourth one, And when I say him too, I had to also work out him or her. I didn't know. Eventually I came to understand that actually God has masculine and feminine qualities, but that took me time to come to understand as well. Come forward a bit and then down here, work our way down to here.
Is it useful to share our experiments of God, like in science method? We share the common points.
Yep.
Or the God experiments is only unique, so we can't share to prove this evidence.
I don't know if that's strictly true, because God, what I've found is that God reacts consistently with the desire of individuals. The problem is the desire of individuals changes. So what I've found is if 2 people have exactly the same strength and power of their desire, then God will respond exactly the same to both of those people. Now, of course, measuring the power of desire is something that, as humans, it's pretty hard to do, isn't it? To measure one person's desire over another. But what I've found through experience is if a person develops the strength of a desire for the relationship with God to the point of a passion, then God consistently responds to that passion. And I have millions of celestial friends who are proof of that. So what is indeterminate to those of you in your first incarnation, for me, is an established fact, because I've got thousands of years of evidence, for me, of these established facts.
So from our point of view, if we haven't experienced God,
Yes?
we can't recognize someone's telling you, yeah, I met God.
Well, this is also very interesting. God can tell you whether they have met God. So when somebody claims to me they have a relationship with God, I know they don't or do have one, because I ask God. And God tells me. So it's really easy, and when I say ask God, I mean to define prayer, remember, we haven't done that yet. But it's really quite easy to determine whether somebody does have a relationship with God or not, based upon what God can tell you about the person, because he's happy to share all information. He doesn't see, like information with Mary is private. It's not like that. He's going, no, he wants all of us to see that we're all brothers and sisters, and we all need to be open and transparent. And he's completely happy to be open and transparent with me about you, if I ask. I don't always ask, but sometimes I do. So when somebody's come to me and says, I have a relationship with God, and I'm going, well, I don't really feel that God's love exists in the person. So I can ask God, well, I don't feel God's love. What's your feeling? That I can now see, I know that I can tell the person, that God tells me who the person has a relationship with that they think is God. It's usually a spirit, an unseen being that they think is God, that they've got a relationship with, and I can start to tell them why they have that relationship, like what addictions are in place for that relationship to occur, and what, you know, why that person, that spirit, the unseen person, is drawn into their life and so forth, and also why the person believes that person is God. Like, all those truths come to you when you're connected to God. Of course, it doesn't when you're not.
So you can say that one day maybe we can have objective measure
Yes,
of knowing God.
eventually, yes. Yeah, but that requires a relationship with God to do. So that's part of the problem, is that some of these things require a relationship with God before you get the gift or the ability to do it. So there's a whole heap of advantages of having a relationship with God, and one of those advantages is the ability to talk to God about any matter and therefore get truth about any matter, and also then be able to determine whether somebody else is connected to God or not, if they claim to be. So if you look in the world today, there are many people who are murderers who claim they're connecting to God, isn't there? In fact, some murderers have even said, I murdered because God told me. Right? Now, once I've got a connection with God, I know that's not true. Right? Because God can tell you that's not true. You know, God's not murderous. So we know straight away then. But if you aren't connected to God, what do you believe? You sort of go, well, you know, that person's having an experience. Is he just nutters, or, you know, is Jesus nutters, or is he real or not? We don't really know, do we? Unless we have some source of information that will tell us. If we come, yeah, and then back.
About trusting God, if I don't trust God, that's an immediate block to receiving, or can you receive it even if you don't have that trust yet? That they will.
I can't. You can't receive anything from a human if you don't have trust of them. So I can't see how you would receive something from God if you don't trust God. But I think let's separate the qualities of God from our feelings about God for a moment, because that's important to do. Because a lot of the times, you know, you hear the word God, and nowadays, like, God, the word is a dirty word, isn't it, really? It's not, and a lot of people, as soon as you start talking about God with a lot of people, they go, oh, you're all getting religious and on me and things like that. They don't have a scientific sort of feel about God at all. And so they sort of feel you're forcing religion down their throat if you start talking about God. So there's a lot of emotional injuries in the human population about God, one of which is a lack of trust. I agree. But if you have them, then of course it's very important, if God exists, to remove them. Because with those emotional impediments, you're not going to be able to connect to God very easily. Makes sense? Yeah? Yep.